welcome to RCA Radio, a podcast covering the latest news and challenges in regulatory compliance and quality assurance facing the life science industries. I'm your host, Brandon Miller. In this episode of RCA Radio, we are providing an outlook into the most important things happening in 2021 to the medical device industry, such as Brexit, the European Medical Device Regulations, EUDAMED, In Vitro Diagnostic Regulation, IVDR, General Data Protection Regulations, GDPR, Unique Device Identifier, UDI, and the European Databank on Medical Devices, EUDAMED. We are going to cover the importance of these medical device initiatives, some of the potential problems companies are facing during implementation, and some alternatives to mitigate those problems. Today I'm joined by Seyed Khorashahi, who is RCA's Executive VP of Medical Device and CTO. Welcome, Seyed.
Thank you, Brendan, for the introduction.
I know there's a lot to cover, so where do you want to begin?
Let's briefly touch on the highlights of how Brexit is impacting the medical device companies marketing their products to the UK in 2021. First, UK will not be transitioning to EU MDR or IVDR since the hard Brexit happened at the end of December in 2020 and ahead of the application date of EU MDR and IVDR. Instead, UK is staying with MDD, AI MDD, and IVDD, and they will be making changes in the future as necessary and appropriate for their market. Let's quickly discuss the impact of this decision on CE mark, registration in UK, notified bodies, and conformity assessment. As far as the CE mark validity is concerned, the MHRA will recognize the CE mark for the devices until June 30th, 2023. This will apply to products CE marked under the MDD, IVDD, AIMDD, MDR, and IVDR. And all Class 1 and general IVD manufacturers can continue to self-declare their products. There is a new requirement for registration of devices with the MHRA, and the timelines are as follows. All Class 3 medical devices and IVD List A devices plus Class 3 implantable devices have a deadline of May 1st, 2021. All Class 2B non-implantables and 2As in IVD List B products have a deadline of September 1st, 2021. And all Class 1 medical devices and general IVD devices have a deadline of January 1, 2022. On January 1st of this year, UK notified bodies became UK approved bodies, and the UK notified bodies can conduct UK conformity assessment. Now the device manufacturers can use UK approved bodies to perform UK conformity assessment and get their UK conformity assessment marking. However, the UK CA marking will not be mandatory until July 1, 2023. Another new requirement is the UK responsible person, and this is applicable to manufacturers without a presence in the UK who will need a UK responsible person. And UK RP can be an individual or a company, and it is similar to EU authorized representative. MHRA has tried to keep the transition simple, and those are the highlights of the impact of Brexit on medical devices being marketed to the UK in 2021.
Let's hope that the UK's medical device companies get on this quick so they don't fall behind with the new Brexit initiative. Now moving on, could you give us some more insight into the EU MDR initiative?
Medical Device Regulation 2017-745 application date is fast approaching and is less than 5 months away after being postponed for a year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Not being ready for the MDR could put your ability to continue to put your products into EU market at risk. Currently, there are 18 MDR designated notified bodies. However, they are pretty busy and there could be around 6 months of wait time to schedule a conformity assessment, which means if you have not already scheduled your conformity assessment, your chances of getting on their calendar is slim. The good news for those who have it scheduled is that they could do this remotely. MDCG 2020-4 guidance document lays out the groundwork for a remote initial audit or an audit to extend the scope of the certification on a case-by-case basis during the COVID pandemic. Let's talk about some of the key changes moving from MDD to MDR. One of those changes is device classification. Now there are 22 classification rules under MDR, which is 4 more than the MDD, and this has resulted in up-classification of some of the devices. Hence, devices need to be reclassified under the MDR classification rules, and these might be different than the MDD class of the devices. One of the more ambiguous rules is Rule 11 about the software classification, and MDCG has provided a guidance document, MDCG 2019-11, that clarifies the criteria for software device classification. However, there is still plenty of subjectivity in determining the classification for software. Another change is more robust clinical evidence is now required throughout the life of the product. No more equivalence. You have to provide your own data and clinical study. There's also more emphasis on post-market surveillance and the fact that it needs to be in place during the whole life cycle of the device with tie back to risk management and vigilance. Another new requirement is common specification, which is a set of technical or clinical requirements that come into play when there is no consensus standard, i.e. there is a common specification on reprocessing single-use devices. You have to keep in mind that you need to comply with both the consensus standards and common specification, otherwise you cannot place your product into EU market. Some of the other changes in Regulation 2017/745 are UDI and the EUDAMED, which we will discuss separately. Now let's talk a little bit about the MDD certificates. You can continue to market your product until the expiration date of any notified body issued MDD certificates or May 26, 2024, whichever comes first. There's also an updated Article 120 that extends the grace period for MDD Class 1 devices that are being up-classified to a higher class as long as they satisfy the following 2 conditions. Condition 1 is the new MDR classification would require a notified body, and the second condition is that you have to have a valid declaration of conformity according to Annex 7 of the MDD, and it has to be drawn up prior to 26 May 2021. MDGC has issued a guidance document, MDGC 2020-2, that clarifies the updates to Article 120. If you have an MDD General Class 1 self-certified product, and your product is also an MDR General Class 1 self-certified product, then you have to have a valid MDR declaration of conformity for MDR by the MDR application date to continue to put your product in the EU market. You also have to keep in mind there are a couple of things associated with your devices that you're shipping out with the MDD certificate. One is that you cannot make any significant changes to the design or the intended purpose of the device after 26 May 2021. Otherwise, your MDD certificate becomes void. The good news is that MDCG 2020-3 is a guidance document that defines what a significant change is. The requirement of the MDR relating to post-market surveillance, market surveillance, vigilance, registration of economic operators and devices will apply to all these devices that you are shipping to the EU market using your MDD certificate. And this is because once the application date of MDR arrives, there will be no MDD designated notified bodies, and you have to follow the new MDR requirements as I said, for registration, surveillance, vigilance, etc. And those are the highlights of the impact of application date of MDR in 2021.
If you haven't already scheduled your assessment, do so now, because with the long wait times, you might not make it before the deadline. And speaking of deadlines, I know the IVDR deadline is coming up very soon as well. Could you elaborate on that?
We are only 17 months away from the date of application of IVDR or Regulation 2017-746. And based on our experience with MDR, that is not a whole lot of time. Currently, there are only 4 designated IVDR notified bodies, which are BSI Netherlands, DECRA, TÜV Rhineland, and TÜV Zuid. Notified body capacity will undoubtedly impact IVD manufacturers' ability to become compliant with IVDR. For those who may not have started the transition to IVDR, the sooner you start, the better chance you have to beat the deadline. Let's just quickly touch on some of the major changes that IVDR brings to us. One of the bigger changes is in device classification, and IVDR has moved from a list-based classification to a rule-based classification in alignment with the International Medical Device Regulations Forum and the GHTF IVD classification guidance. In vitro diagnostic medical devices include a wide range of instruments, point-of-care devices, laboratory-developed tests, reagents, and kits used to analyze human samples and guide clinical decisions. Classification determinations are based on the IVD device's potential to harm, it's all risk-based, to harm a patient, user, or the environment by examining the intended purpose and what type of technology is being used on the device. IVDR has a 4-tier classification system, with Class A representing low-risk devices and Class D the highest risk devices. Class A IVD devices do not need notified body involvement and are self-certified. Class B, C, and D, on the other hand, require notified body involvements for the assessment of the quality system and technical documentation. Device classification will have a huge impact since more IVD products will require notified body involvement. It is estimated that we'll go from 20% notified body involvement under IVDD to 80% notified body involvement under IVDR. A lot of products that were self-certified under IVDD will now require notified bodies to perform conformity assessment and issue certificates of compliance under IVDR. There's a guidance document from the Medical Device Coordination Group, MDCG 2020-16, that gives clarification on the IVD device classification. The next change that we'll touch is the life cycle approach. There are more stringent requirements for clinical evidence demonstrating conformity throughout the life of the product. There are requirements for manufacturers to establish and demonstrate effective quality management system, and there are new requirements for post-market performance monitoring and reporting. Another area that has been touched is the greater supply chain oversight and device traceability. The new regulations have been extended to cover the entire supply chain, adding additional responsibilities for manufacturers as well as other economic operators, importers, distributors, and authorized representatives. Each link in the supply chain now has the responsibility to check the previous link, and the manufacturers must appoint a person responsible for regulatory compliance to ensure IVDR compliance across the chain. Introduction of the unique device identifier, the UDI, will improve the traceability throughout the device's life cycle. IVDR also gives notified bodies discretionary authority to audit suppliers and subcontractors as they deem necessary. Let's talk a little bit about the certificate validity. You can place your IVD products into service until their IVDD certificate expires or until 26 May of 2024. And any devices not listed in Annex 1 of the IVDD must be certified on their IVDR except for self-tests. If you're putting your products out in the field with an IVDD certificate, then you have to keep in mind that you cannot have any significant changes to the design or intended purpose of the device after May 26, 2022. Otherwise, your IVDD certificate will be voided. A medical device coordination group issued MDCG 2020-3 to help clarify what constitutes a significant change. However, I would recommend that prior to making any changes that you would want to review that with your notified body to ensure that what you have determined and have a rationale for why it's not a significant change is in agreement with what the notified body's thinking is. The second thing that you have to remember is that the requirements for the IVDR relating to post-market surveillance, vigilance, registration of economic operators, etc., still applies. And this is because once the application date of IVDR arrives, there will be no IVDD designated notified bodies, and you have to follow the new IVDR requirements for registrations, surveillance, vigilance, as I said before. In summary, the combination of IVDR device classification changes resulting in fourfold increase of products requiring notified body involvement and lack of sufficient number of notified bodies will create a challenging situation to beat the deadline for all involved. There is a push from industry to postpone the implementation of IVDR by a year, similar to MDR, but so far there is no sign that that might be happening. Those are the highlights of the impact of the application date of IVDR.
Those are a lot of changes that are coming with IVDR, and I hope companies are prepared for the quickly approaching deadline, because I would not want to bank on the postponement. Now let's move to UDI and go over its impact on EU MDR and IVDR.
Unique device identifier is detailed in Annex 6 of the EU Medical Device Regulation 2017/745. EU UDI has three parts. One is the device identifier, next is the production identifier, and last is the carrier. UDI-DI is a device identifier which indicates the product's version, model number, and its manufacturer or labeler. This allows the unambiguous identification of a specific device on the market. UDI-PI, on the other hand, is a conditional variable portion of the UDI that identifies the production, such as serial number, expiration date, lot number, date of manufacturing, etc. The UDI carrier represents the information in two ways. One is a human readable interpretation, or HRI. The second way that the UDI is represented by the carrier is automatic identification and data capture, or AIDC, which as of today is either a linear barcode, a 2D barcode, or an RFID. The Medical Device Coordination Group has published a guidance document, MDCG 2018-1, that further details the requirements of EU UDI. Let's talk next about the UDI registration, obligation to place the UDI on the devices, and the UDI data submission. UDI registration is accomplished by reaching out to issuing entities. Currently, issuing entities are GS1, HIBIC, ICC BBA, and IFA. The first three are common between EU UDI and the FDA UDI. Issuing entities assign UDI to medical devices, and this can be done right now, and it's the first step of MDR and IVDR compliance, since it will be referenced in relevant documentation with the notified body, with certificate of free sale, and the EU Declaration of Conformity all reference the UDI. Obligation to place the UDI and timelines are different depending on the device classification. For MDR, Class 3s are May 26, 2021. For Class 2A and 2B, the deadline is May 26, 2023. And for Class 1 devices, it is May 26, 2025. For IVDR devices, the UDI timelines are as follows. Class D devices are May 26, 2023. For Class B and C devices, the deadline is May 26, 2025. And for Class A devices, it is May 2027. As far as the UDI submission is concerned, there's an expectation that manufacturers are responsible for the initial submission and updates of the identifying information and other device data elements in UDI database. And typically the changes need to be reported within 30 days. Annex 6 Part B covers the core data elements to be provided to the UDI database. The UDI module of EUDAMED is expected to become online in May of this year. However, manufacturers will not be able to do UDI submission until UDI module of EUDAMED comes online. So for Class 3s, if it is not online, they will not be able to do submission of their UDI data. Those are the highlights of what you need to prepare for UDI to be compliant with EU, MDR, and IVDR.
Let's hope that the UDI module comes out soon for EUDAMED. And speaking of EUDAMED, could you give us some background on what EUDAMED is and why it's important?
EUDAMED is intended to improve transparency and coordination of information regarding medical devices available on the EU market. EUDAMED is structured around 6 interconnected modules and a public website. The modules are the actor's registration, the UDI device registration, the notified bodies and certificates module, the clinical investigation and performance studies module, the vigilance and post-market surveillance module, and the market surveillance module. So who are the intended users of the EUDAMED? EUDAMED will be used by the competent authorities, the EU Commission, the notified bodies, the economic operators, and the public. The planned go-live date of EUDAMED after a 2-year delay is May 2022. However, the EU Commission has agreed to make the different modules available on a gradual basis as soon as they are functional. The module on actor registration has been available since December of 2020. The actor roles are the economic operators, the manufacturers, authorized representative importers and distributors that comprise the economic operators, and 2 more roles, which are the person responsible for regulatory compliance, PRRC, and the sponsor of clinical investigations and performance studies. There is a requirement for the single registration number, or the SRN, which is generated by EUDAMED and issued through EUDAMED by the competent authority after they have validated the actor registration request. Every economic operator will have their own single registration number. The module on UDI device registration, the second module, and the module on certificates and notified bodies, the third module, will become available by May 2021. And the remaining modules will be rolled out as soon as they are functional. User interaction with the EUDAMED or data exchange can be accomplished in one of the following 3 ways. A manual method, by manually entering the data via EUDAMED portal's user interface. With this method, all you would need to enter your data is a browser, but could become tedious and error-prone as the amount of information to enter becomes bigger, especially if you have multiple products. The second method is semi-automated, and data can be exchanged via a file, and the data can be uploaded by means of XML files. The XML data must be validated prior to the upload. With this method, the data entry errors are eliminated, but you would require software tools to create and validate your XML file. The last method is a fully automated machine-to-machine or M2M for automatic data exchange between an external backend system and the EUDAMED backend services. This method is going to be more time-consuming and costly to implement, but it is the best option for companies with large number of products. Those are the highlights of what you need to know to prepare for EUDAMED and become compliant with EU MDR and IVDR.
Thanks for sharing those different methods. I'm sure our listeners will appreciate it. Lastly, let's talk about GDPR and how it affects what we've talked about so far today, such as EU MDR and IVDR.
General Data Protection or GDPR regulation is very broad and will apply to all companies selling to and storing personal information about citizens in Europe. GDPR went into effect in 2018, and personal information is any data that can be used directly or indirectly to identify a data subject. Our focus is how GDPR is related to IVDR and MDR. And if you are a device manufacturer that is collecting and processing personal data with your device, or if you're entering information into EUDAMED that might contain personal data, or if you're like in general collecting information as data subjects in Europe, visit your website and you're collecting information about them. And all those circumstances, you need to comply with GDPR. GDPR will levy harsh fines against those who violate its privacy and security standards, with penalties reaching into the tens of millions of euros. And it includes compensation for individuals whose privacy has been compromised on top of fines levied by the authorities. There are three main parts to GDPR. One is data subject rights, where consent comes in play before you can collect data. Two is controller and processor responsibilities, and this is where the controllers and processors need to put measures in place such as encryption, cybersecurity measures, measures to anonymize or de-identify the personal data to protect the information that they have in their custody. The last one is the cross-border data transfer, which you would need a data transfer agreement or a DTA, and that's the only way that you could transfer human subject data from one institution to another institution for research purposes or cross-border. There are 7 data protection principles that you need to keep in mind as a data controller or processor. 1, lawfulness, fairness and transparency. Processing must be lawful, fair, and transparent to the data subject. 2, purpose limitation. You must process data for the legitimate purposes specified explicitly to the data subject when you collected it. 3, data minimization. You should collect and process only as much data as absolutely necessary for the purposes specified. 4, accuracy. You must keep personal data accurate and up to date. 5, storage limitation. You may only store personal data for as long as necessary for the specified purposes. 6, integrity and confidentiality. Processing must be done in such a way as to ensure appropriate security, integrity, and confidentiality. 7, accountability. The data controller is responsible for being able to demonstrate GDPR compliance with all of these principles. In summary, privacy and cybersecurity go hand in hand and are applicable throughout the life of the personal information, and the device manufacturers have to have systems in place to be GDPR compliant.
And with that, we've covered all of the major things happening to the medical device industry this year. Seyed, do you have any final thoughts or advice you'd like to share with our listeners before we wrap up?
Making plans and executing the plan during the transition period is the key to a successful transition and a good mitigation to prevent surprises and letting things go south. We at RCA can help with planning and execution of the plan to ensure compliance with the new EU regulations.
Thank you, Seyed. That's some great advice. And thank you to our listeners for tuning into this episode of RCA Radio. Be sure to subscribe to be the first to know when we come out with a new episode. Thanks and have a great day.